Hello.
Hi.
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 Hello.
I'm curious about
I'm curious about
Building open, authentic, loving relationship.
I'm curious about jealousy.
I'm curious about polyamory.
Does it just mean that you're fucking all the time?
How can I tell my parents that my partner is already married?
I'm curious about
How do you know when you're too busy to have another relationship?
I'm curious about dominant and subordinate relationships.
I'm curious about sexual health.
How can relationships evolve with people as they grow and change?
Uh-oh.
He wants attention from Tyler. Taylor, love me. Oh, you have to love me. What's going on? You have to love me. But then don't love me too much. I have attachment issues.
Okay, let's start. Hi, welcome to the Curious Fox podcast. This podcast is for those who challenge the status quo in love, sex, and relationships. My name is Effy Blue.
And I'm Jacqueline Misla. And on this episode, we're going to be talking about fidelity. More specifically, how love and loyalty can be manifested without fidelity.
Absolutely.
So this story starts with me, actually, now. This weekend, I have been thinking a lot about fidelity. I am in 2 relationships, and inherent in that is that there is not necessarily fidelity to one person, emotional or physical fidelity to one person. And yet, I feel like the way in which I have crafted these 2 relationships, it's almost like 2 monogamous relationships. Mm-hmm. And I know you and I have talked about this a lot, that happens to be a pattern of folks, particularly you go from monogamous to non-monogamous relationships, that you just start having multiple monogamous relationships. And so in some dialogue with my partner this weekend, we started to talk through, for me, what feels like the inevitability of me wanting to connect with somebody. And while I don't think I have the capacity for another kind of full-blown relationship, I do think that it is a part of who I am to want to connect, to want to flirt, to want to have interesting dialogue with people at different levels. And I think that was hard and triggering for my partner. And so in that conversation, when we were talking about, well, if there isn't fidelity, then what? Mm-hmm. My answer was integrity.
Yeah.
And that was an answer I've stolen from you.
Yeah, it's a good one. It's definitely a good contender.
Yeah.
As I say, well, it's a good contender.
So I wanted to just talk about it with you today because it's been on my mind.
For sure. I did not the last Curious Fox, the Curious Fox before that. I did a talk on
Consider This.
Consider This. I'm sorry. The last Consider This. My talk was called If Not Fidelity, Then What? Mm-hmm. And it's something that comes up very often. It's because societally, that's how we define relationships, right? A relationship at its highest value is defined by fidelity. Mm-hmm. And often it's interesting, we sort of say fidelity is what defines the relationship at its highest value. And then we reduce the meaning of fidelity to no sex. That's kind of how it plays out. But if you actually go back to the original word, fidelity, I actually pulled it up. The definition is faithfulness to a person, cause, or a belief demonstrated by continuing loyalty and support. So unfortunately, when we use it in the context of relationships, we do reduce this like amazing idea of like being loyal and supportive and faithful to just this idea of like, we're going to do that through not having sex with others, which I personally think is a very reductive way of looking at things. Mm-hmm. And
because you can be physically faithful, but still not be good in the relationship, not be supportive or respectful or loyal in other ways.
Yeah, totally. And the reason why I say integrity as an answer is just to give people there's something else that they can think about. I don't necessarily think that it is the answer. I think it is a good answer, and it is a good contender as a value. And the idea is to think about it as let's create a value system around the relationship rather than an activity, right? So at the moment, if we go back to the original reductive idea of fidelity, it's about not having sex with others, which is essentially you're defining a relationship through an activity, right? And I think that's, reductive. Potentially, what I'm advocating for is going back to its original meaning which is to be faithful to a person, cause, or a belief. And then, okay, so let's now then define what that person, cause, and a belief is. And then we continue, and then we demonstrate that faithfulness through loyalty and support.
Right. Yes.
And integrity is that. Integrity is, my favorite definitions of integrity is the way the Brené Brown's version, which is to do what you say and say what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
So that's kind of like big, headline answer to that question.
Yeah.
And integrity is just one of the values. The work that I do with clients in sessions is about, let's figure out the value system for the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? What do you want the relationship to feel like, to sound like, to create in the world?
Right, because for me, that would be integrity, would be that we are going to be in alignment with what we have agreed.
Mm-hmm.
Me and this other person or people have agreed that is going to happen, that I am going to stay true to that up until the point that no longer feels true for me. Then we're going to have a conversation about that, and we're going to decide together what that means. I think that particularly when I was having this conversation this weekend, what was, I think the thing that was triggering was the fear that one person would move further before the other, that there would be emotional connection or physical connection that would happen before the other person was ready, or before they knew, or before and as much as possible, I think in that conversation, the goal is to move through this journey together. And it doesn't mean that each person is going to be on the same page and ready for something at the same time, but that at least there'll be dialogue about that and trying to minimize surprises. And so, for example, within that particular relationship, that's what integrity looks like. That they're to minimize surprises, to have dialogue along the way, to talk about where we're at and what that means for us. Where in my other relationship, when we've been together much longer and there isn't that fear doesn't manifest itself in that way, to have integrity with each other looks different. We have different guidelines, if you will, around what that means.
Sure. I would challenge it a little bit, right? So the level that you're describing this is like, and you even use the verb happen, like what's going to happen in the relationship. I would challenge that a little bit and say it might be worth looking at what the relationship is going to be rather than what's going to happen, right? So this is what I mean about, so like the things that you've described, which is to have communication, and so what I would do is translate those into values, not activities, but values, right? So good communication is communication is a need and a good value, right? And integrity is actually also a value, and the other thing that I heard from you, like if I was going to translate what I heard, will be mutuality. So I think once you are able to get to the core values of what you're trying to establish within the relationship, then you won't have to monitor and police behavior by behavior by behavior.
I agree with you. No, that makes complete sense to me. Yes. Because I also think, we were having the conversation about like when things just happen, like people say like, well, it just happened. And, personally for me, and maybe I have shown up to the world more disciplined than, and principled, but I've allowed my behavior to happen. Like I've allowed things to happen. I've made decision after decision that I leaned in closer for the kiss, or I lingered longer when I shouldn't have, or I put myself in positions to allow behavior, to allow that behavior to take place. And so I wouldn't make the excuse like, well, that thing, we just happened to kiss and that just happened. Like I allowed that to happen. And so I think you're right. I appreciate your pushback around the something to happen, because I do think that it's all behaviors and decisions. And I agree that what we're trying to do is figure out what are the values that we agree on, that then we will make good choices in alignment with those values.
Exactly. And I think then we're not stuck with this idea of fidelity in this reductive sense of like not having sex with people, right? And I think a lot of the time, especially people, there's a lot of talk around agreements around relationships, right? So like when you're first opening up your relationship, if you're in an existing couple, you have agreements, right? Most people actually kind of start with rules. Let's have rules, right? So hopefully they'll do a bit of research.
And could we pause there for a second? Because sometimes I think that they're used like interchangeably, guidelines, rules, promises, things like that. But they're not.
No.
There is difference between those language, between a rule and a guideline or some. Can you talk through the differences?
Yeah, I'm exactly going to do that.
Because I know that in some cases, when we talked, for example, about relationship anarchy, people were shocked and awe in some cases in that room around, wait, but there are no rules. How could there be no rules? And I think the folks who were talking about their relationship says, well, there are agreements that we make with the people that we're with and with ourselves that we want to stay in integrity with, but there aren't necessarily rules.
Right. So the things that get confused are rules, agreements, promises, and boundaries. Right? That's like those words kind of get mixed up, and we use them interchangeably. And they all have a place. I think. I don't necessarily believe in like, no, you only have one of those things.
Yes.
I think that we need to understand the quality of whatever those things are.
Yes. All right. Let's go do it.
Okay. So boundaries. Boundaries are things that are not okay. So personal boundaries, we say we have a boundary, and I think boundaries are personal, and in its most simple form, boundaries are things that are not okay. I use boundaries in other ways to get people to understand different concepts and
not okay to be done to me, not okay that you do.
Right, personal.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
You can't say it's not okay for you not to to eat meat. That's not okay.
Right.
That's not a boundary.
Right. Exactly. Right. Exactly. So. Boundaries are personal and things that are not okay for you.
Right. You're not allowed to touch me or you're not allowed to whatever.
Exactly.
That's my own boundary.
It's my boundary. Next one is rules. Rules are often about other people.
Right.
Right.
What they can or cannot do.
What they cannot do. And when you say, we have rules, often if you look at the structure of the rules, it's one person telling to there's a list of things of one person telling to the other person what they can or cannot do. Right. And it could be like 10 rules, like 4 of them one person's imposing on the other one and 6 of them the other, but ultimately it's about the other, what you're telling people what to do and what not to do.
Yes.
Now, if you feel, if that's okay, if you're okay with that, I'm not against that. If that's what your relationship is going to build on, fine and fair, as long as you're aware of these distinctions that we're making now and you understand, like, rules are rules. And if that you want to have rules, then you have to realize that's what it is.
And neither of you are rebellious in nature.
Right, exactly. And some people thrive around rules, you know?
Well, I was going to say, when you're playing, sometimes rules are fun.
Right,
because then you're, you don't want to break them, or sometimes you do want to break them.
Yeah, exactly. So we got boundaries, we got rules. Next one is agreements.
Yes.
Right? Agreements are conditions that the both parties negotiate and agree upon. And they are and should really be negotiated. Yes. Some of them seem like no-brainers. Like of course we agree on that. Like of course we agree on, safer sex, right? It's an easy one. So agreements are things that you agree upon, is conditions that you agree upon as a collective, be it 2, 3, or 5, or whatever that is. And then promises. Promises are things that one person promises to another person. And just because I promise something to you doesn't mean that you promise that you are then upheld by that promise, right? And I can do that. I can make a promise to you. And I might, promises don't necessarily require mutuality.
Got it.
Right?
That makes sense.
So it's kind of the direction in which things go.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
I happen to think the thing that kind of cuts through all of that and makes all of this really easy is values, which kind of for me falls around agreements. Like agreeing on values, I find kind of clarifies everything else that we talked about.
Don't you have to talk about how those values are manifested to ensure that there's mutuality around the behaviors that fall in line with those values?
Say that one more time.
So if we both value honesty, but honesty for you means you won't lie to me. Honesty for me means full transparency. We're interpreting the value of honesty and the behavior around that differently. So won't there have to be discussion around how that behavior manifests, or rather how the value is manifested into behavior?
Yes. So 2 things. you definitely need to be on the same page about what that value is, right? So you do need to talk about that. 2, there needs to be tolerance for ambiguity. None of these things communication is flawed. There is glitches in the system. It's not clear, right? So, there needs to be a assumption of goodwill.
Yeah.
There needs to be approach of like, you don't want to get, you also don't want to approach it like, how can I game the system, right? So it's both an assumption of goodwill, also good intentions on either side. And definitely communication around like, what does that value mean to me? Like to talk about it. Some things are, some things are clear and some things aren't. Yeah. And these things aren't done like, in half an hour on the back of a napkin. It's a good place to start. A lot of my good ideas are come from back of napkins.
But those 3 things that you named, that you're just like, it shouldn't be around you trying to protect yourself or like trying to plan out for the future. I'm like, those are the hardest things. Like that's what all of us are actually trying to do behind the scenes, is you try to protect yourself by creating rules or whatever it is in the hope that then that's going to stop you from being hurt. You try to plan way out into the future, 10 steps ahead, again in the spirit of protecting yourself. And so much of our behavior is rooted in that.
For some people, right? And again, that's like the thing that I go back to often is this the tolerance for ambiguity. For some people, they do have a sensitive disposition around feeling safe, right? And they want to feel safe, and their strategies around that need for safety. And it could be the strategy they prefer most is as little ambiguity as possible, as much clarity as possible, as much solid answers as possible. But it's you're not gonna get that.
Right. And I imagine it's aligned with attachment style in some ways, right? So if you are somebody who has an insecure attachment and you are inclined to need more, like you're the octopus, you need more time, attention, effect, then you probably want more clarity, more rules, more. And if you're the turtle and you need more space, then you need actually less. You want people to ask you less questions. You want less imposition. So that makes sense to me then, that safety will translate differently depending on how you show up to relationships and how you show up to yourself. That makes sense.
And by the way, safety is also a value. Right, it could be one of the values that you assign to your relationship, and if you do need to get into this. Like, what does it take for you to feel safe? And those of us who have trauma, and pretty much everybody has trauma in their history, just the severity is different. We do need to look at that to figure out what kind of an impact that may or may not have in our life today. Right, sometimes we might be coming to this idea of safety not from our present disposition, but from a past experience. And we're kind of like, the safety switch is kind of stuck. And we're like, we're unsafe. And you're like, are you really unsafe? Like, or something happened in the past and you were unsafe in that moment and the safety switch kind of got stuck. Yeah. And now it's like coming out for you in relationships. And that is really apparent for some people who've had big T trauma, big trauma. And for other people, if it's not like such an obvious trauma, it's kind of running in the background and they don't realize.
Yeah, can we talk through that a little bit? I want to it feels in my mind we're like going down like a spiral. Like, let's get deeper into this, because I'm wondering what your thoughts are around the responsibility of each person to attend to that pain, that fear, those triggers that are being triggered regarding the trauma. I'm interested in that. I wrote a post recently about I'm sorry that my truth causes you pain. And I know that that's the experience of a lot of folks who I have conversations with, that their truth around either their gender identity or their sexual identity or their orientation regarding being monogamous or non-monogamous may cause their family, their friends, or their partner's pain. And really that could be about the other person, something in them, some safety or not feeling safe is being triggered. And what's the responsibility of each person to man that, to address that?
So there is definitely a huge school of thought, right, that says that nobody can make you feel anything.
Mm-hmm.
There is that school of thought that you feel how you feel based on choice, experience, wherever you are, and that the other person can't technically like make you feel a certain way. Now, I have a, that's like there's a real school of thought that's very kind of militant about that. I take a little softer approach to that because I think if someone's right up in your face and screaming at you, sure, they can't make you feel a certain way, but those conditions, we are also human, right? We also have some automatic reactions built in, and you feel how you feel. So you can be some Zen master and be like absolutely Zen when someone's right up in your face and like screaming at you. Yeah, but in the real world, that's just not what, that's just not how it's gonna happen in reality. And that's an extreme example. I'll give you like a more subtle example. If somebody is showing around, if you're living with somebody, right, cohabiting with somebody, and they suddenly start becoming very possessive over their phone. Like normally where they would leave it around, they like start hiding it. They maybe even change their password on it or whatever. Like there's a shift in behavior. To say that that's not going to have an impact on anybody is unrealistic, right? Now, what you do with that behavior, what you do with that feelings, whatever comes up is a conversation that we can have. But to sort of just assume that your actions have no impact on the other person, I think that's an unrealistic.
Yes, and that makes sense to me. The distinction that I also hear you saying between a reaction and response, that we may not be able to control our reaction, which is how we feel, but we can control our response, which is how we behave in response to that feeling.
For sure, yeah. I mean, I say this all the time. The difference between reaction and response is a pause.
Yes.
And to go, how do I want to respond to that?
Right.
And some of us have access to that pause and some of us don't. And it's a muscle. And that's why like we talk about meditation. Like meditation works that exact muscle that you can have a pause to check in with yourself, to describe, to then think about your behavior, and make a choice around that.
Yes. So to go back to the example that I shared in the beginning, with my partner, I'm deeply in love and do not want them at all to feel triggered, to feel insecure, to feel concerned about my loyalty, about my integrity within that relationship. And so I do feel a sense of responsibility when they do feel triggered to remind them that we're going to go through this together, that there aren't going to be steps that I'm going to take without having, dialogue. And I understand that that's also their responsibility to not be triggered by every conversation that I have, or to not be concerned every time I, am engaged in a conversation with somebody, that we both have a responsibility for me to show up in integrity and to sit in their pain or their concern or their worry. And they have to manage through that.
Right. I think it's not, again, I just want to challenge that a little bit. It's not that the responsibility not to be triggered, because the whole point about being triggered is that you are triggered.
Yes, fair.
If you could choose the trigger, then it wouldn't be a trigger, right? So the thing is not that it's their responsibility not to be triggered, but to know what to do about it when they are triggered. To recognize the triggers. I mean, if you're like get to ninja level, you kind of recognize that what I call precursors. So like the moment before you're triggered, right? Or the thing that is going to trigger you. And then you're able to work in that pause, right? Because the pause after a trigger is a much harder place to like navigate than the pause before a trigger.
Right, because you're not emotionally intelligent now. You're trying to just get back to your wise mind to make good choices.
Like your frontal lobe shut down, right? You're in your amygdala, in caveman brain, your frontal lobe is shut down. To like, you'd need like an Zen place to be like, okay, now like pause life. I want to like re-engage my frontal lobe and like get into a reasonable. It's just so if you can like really work with your triggers. So I think the responsibility is to work with your triggers, to understand, to get to a place of self-knowledge, do some work on like what those triggers are, how to handle them, like next level, like learn your precursors. What causes a trigger? Can you put things in place?
And you can feel it in your body. You can feel your jaw tighten. You can feel your hands clench. You can feel your stomach tighten. Like if you're wondering to yourself, well, how do I figure out my precursors? Your body is going to tell you. If you stay in tune there, you can feel yourself clenching.
Yes.
Bracing yourself.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the trick is, the important part is that you stay in tune to your body.
Yes.
The struggle is people with, depending on your the severity of your trauma, a part of trauma is a disconnection from the body, right? Is if you disconnect from your body, and a lot of people who struggle with trauma are disconnected from their body, you're not getting the signals. That's why they're being triggered, right? So this is why you need to work backwards. And mind-body connection is something that I think we don't talk enough about around trauma. A lot of therapy around trauma is what they call top-down, so talk therapy. My personal journey on anybody that I work with, if anybody is dealing with trauma, there needs to be bottom up. You need to be able to integrate the body back into the mind.
Yes.
So you're absolutely right. Your body will tell you when you're about to be triggered or when you are triggered. You need to work on the mind-body connection.
Being in tune. Yeah.
Yeah. So going back to what you're saying, your responsibility is to remain aligned with the values that you agreed upon, and that your behavior is reflecting those, and then you feel like you're in integrity. It's kind of where you, like the boundary up to which that you can control, right? And from then onwards, it's the person's or your partner's willingness, desire, hard work around their makeup.
Yes.
Right. So they're learning about their triggers, learning about their emotional well-being, learning about self-soothing, learning about emotional regulation, getting that mind-body connection, whether it's through the easiest way actually is yoga, but also dance, moving meditation. There's a bunch of other ways of doing it. That's self-care, and that's their responsibility. So there is a line. There is a line. Now, going back to that example, if you now suddenly start hiding your phone or being cagey or whatever, then you're not in integrity. You're not in integrity of the values that you agreed upon. Then you are affecting them. You know what I mean? They can, work on everything, but if you're then bringing that energy in, if you're out of integrity, I think it's unfair to expect the other person is going to be just fine because they're because you can't make them feel anything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Which is, I think, is also really important, because if we're this whole topic is about fidelity and what that looks like. And it sounds like the first step is having agreement around what that means, what integrity, what loyalty, even what fidelity looks like within a relationship, and defining that, and then staying in tune and staying close to that definition of that, and not necessarily, so it's not about sexual exclusivity or emotional exclusivity, but it could be the behaviors around which you are protecting information or protecting yourself.
For sure. Yeah. And it could be about sexual. Polyfidelity is a thing, right? So fidelity in its sexual form, so like sexual, let's call it sexual fidelity. We assign sexual fidelity to monogamy, right? So two people having sex with one another, sexual fidelity. Again, a little reductive, because if we go back to the original meaning of fidelity, which is to be faithful, right? You can say we have, there's me and my wife, in your case, me and my partner, and those are and we have sexual fidelity among the three of us, right? So that's polyfidelity.
Yes.
So it's not that you can be open, and have sexual fidelity.
Yes.
If it's your design.
Yes. And I would say that's actually where we're at right now. Right. I would say that I am polyfidelitous. And even within that, though, having conversations around, in the same way, honestly, a monogamous couple would, and we say this all the time, that all the lessons that we're talking through as it relates to non-monogamy are applicable in a monogamous construct around, is flirting then within that line, or is fantasizing about someone else within that line, or is spending time with someone else within that line. Like, what falls actually under fidelity is a conversation that we have.
Yeah. I would, again, the way that you're having the conversation is on the happening, the doing, on the activity level, right?
Yes.
I would be interested in like making those lists. Like the way that I would work with a client is that, okay, I'm a big fan of meeting people where they're at, right? Telling them what they're doing wrong is not a good way to get people like excited about what they're doing. So I would say, okay, write all those things down, like the doing stuff, flirting, like get those down, and then see if you can back into the values that you're trying to preserve, right? Because what you will be trying to do is we're either trying to create something and preserve something, or we're trying to prevent something. Those are your those are your things.
Trying to create, prevent.
You create, preserve, or prevent.
Create, preserve, or prevent.
Right.
Got it.
So often the doing stuff that you're doing, it's going to be one of those things.
Yes.
Right. And through figuring out what you're trying to create preserve or prevent, you'll get to the values. And then once you nail the values, then you're not gonna have to write a script per behavior, because you're never gonna get that right.
Okay. All right. So what if the thing that's one partner is trying to either create, preserve, or protect, create, preserve, or prevent is that there is not alignment there. So, for example, with I think my partner is new to non-monogamy. And so this was the first non-monogamous relationship they were in. And because I came inherent with my daughter and my wife, I think that was like a package deal that they understood was going to be a part of my life. And so okay, I can get over that. But now anything new, that feels very different. And so I think for them, they do want to prevent actually other connections or other relationships. I think that they've, are comfortable with this particular dynamic, but wouldn't want me to spend more time and kind of have, more time, energy, or emotional connection with somebody else. So what they're trying to prevent is different than what the circumstances I would create for myself.
Yeah. I mean, and here you are, right? So this is
sorry about that.
Yeah.
That was the episode.
Yeah. And we're done. No. I mean, these are the nuances of relationships when you get into it, right? And this is where the pull and push starts. This is when the negotiation starts.
Yes. And what's interesting, and I'm wondering about your experience in this, I'm sure that you have sat across many a couple or many a person in front of you who's talked through, but I'm okay with it. Right? But why aren't they? And so there's this distinction in my household. We talk about platinum rule. So as children, we are taught golden rule, that we should treat others the way we want to be treated. And we have elevated in that in my household and said that we want to go platinum rule. It's not about treating others how you want to be treated. It's treating them how they want to be treated. That's the next level up. But that can become challenging, because if my partner tells me about them flirting with somebody else, or they think someone else is cute or something like that, there's like little bits of jealousy that'll get triggered, but it shows up for me in a more of a playful way. And I show up actually much more kind of curious and interested and, ooh, tell me more about that. And because I have that reaction, I do want them to have that reaction. And so when they show up really seriously jealous and not happy about it, I say, but when you tell me about crushes that you have, I don't create this negative energy around it. And so even though I know and I preach the sermon of platinum rule, I still go back to that in my own mind of, but I'm happy for you. Why can't you be happy for me?
Yeah, people are different, right? And we also talk about symmetry versus symmetry versus synergy, right? I think it's also an unrealistic expectation to think that there's going to be always symmetry in the relationship,
right?
And the example that I often give is like, so we're right now the team is in the office, so we have 4 people in the room.
Yes,
and lunch is upon us. Right. And if we, when it's lunchtime, magically a table appears with abundant with food of all types. And if I then say to everybody, okay, everyone, we're all going to have the same amount of food. And by the way, I'm not so hungry today. Right? And then I could have one of you go, oh, no, neither am I. And then one would be like, are you kidding me? I haven't had dinner last night. I haven't had breakfast this morning. I'm starving. What do you mean I have to have the same amount? Right? And the other person be like, oh, sure. Like, I'll have whatever is happening. Right? So it's like, it's the same idea. To say that, to expect that everyone's going to approach something and it's going to be same for everyone, it's unrealistic because everyone's expectations are different. Right? So what you ideally want to get to is synergy, where people are getting whatever they need out of it. It doesn't necessarily have to be, and that it works, right? Because for example, where it might not work is that if I then come to that dinner table or that lunch table and be like, I want it all. No one's getting any food but me, right? Or if I like cough all over it, right? Like, right? So then it's not synergy. I'm like ruining it for everyone, right? But if I approach and I'd be like, everyone, help yourselves to whatever you need, without policing what each and every one person's eating, that's synergy.
Yes. No, that makes sense to me. I think what I want to normalize is there is a cost to this. There's an emotional cost to growth and all these things. And so I think to your point before, the Zen approach is to be like, you can show up different. I'm going to show up different. And I work to get there. And there are moments of frustration. There are moments of, watching them be the beneficiary of my safe space for them to share out all their crushes and feeling frustrated, that I don't have that same welcomed response when I talk about, people who I'm crushing on. And so, but that's just,
yeah. I have a question for you.
Sure.
Genuinely deep down.
Yes.
When you are on the receiving side of that,
Okay.
so your partner's coming to you and they're like sharing their crushes.
Yeah.
Are you truly feeling like what you just said, which is kind of playful and curious? Are those your like authentic feelings, or are you laying down the groundwork of like, well, I am doing this now because that's
question.
what I want? Am I signaling to you that's what I want?
It's a fantastic question because I have in my past self been highly manipulative. So it is actually the right question to ask me. And there are moments when, because it was such a pattern for me, because for so long I had lived these two lives of meeting external expectations outside and having this like secret life on the inside that I wanted to tap into, I would find ways in which to let that inner self out, and would do that via manipulation. So there are moments even now, years later, where I have to check myself because it could be so far deep in that intentionality. I don't think that's the case. I think that I really do feel secure in my relationship. And so I am actually not concerned that a crush will turn into a surprise for me or us, because I believe that we'll work that through together. So I think that's what's rooted in my curiosity and playfulness around it. I actually never showed up that way. Even my high school and college relationships, I'd probably be the first one to point out if someone was attractive in the room. If I was with a boyfriend, I would say, look at her, she's gorgeous. Like that was just how I showed up. And I think that's rooted in my security. And I'm sure that there are moments where I think to myself, even if it's unconscious, I'm going to show up supportive because in the future, I'm going to want to get that back.
Right. And I think that's when it becomes, when you're setting it up that way, then when you don't get it back, there's an underlying subtle expectation.
Right. Reciprocity expectation.
Right. So that's why I'm like, I would almost...
I don't think that is the case, but I have to check myself for it, if I'm being honest.
It's just, I'll give you a personal example. I am never hard on people who are late because I am terrible at timekeeping. I am annoyed when people are late, but I never make it obvious or I never say anything because I know that it's inevitable that I'm going to be late. So I'm banking on the idea that when I'm late, that people aren't going to give me a hard time, right? I know this about myself, but I am often annoyed when people are late. I just don't make a fuss, right? Because in my head, I'm like, I just want to set the standard that people don't get in trouble for being late. I'm the one that's going to be late next time, right? So it is manipulative and it is signaling, right? It's not my authentic feelings. Right. What I should be saying is like, I'm annoyed you're late, and then I should either be a good timekeeper or next time I'm late and I get that back, tolerate it, right? That's the authentic thing to do. But my own stuff, I'm working on it. Like this is a good example of like you're sort of you manipulate your behavior because of this golden rule thing that we're like putting out there, right? And it's kind of a little bit manipulative, a little bit like I want to put The problem with that is that over long term, it's not sustainable. And it's going to come out because eventually you're going to be pissed. Right. Because you've been it's not your authentic.
And it's like an exaggerated pissed because it's been building up.
Right. Exactly. So I'm, I would just like, for you, I'd just be like, I'd wonder, what the, like deep down, are you kind of like, are you programming yourself? Are you like are you controlling your own behavior and showing up a certain way because you want to bank this like you want to set the tone for when it is you that shows up?
I think honestly the answer to all these things are just go deep down. It's like,
and see what comes out.
Right, exactly. And do that in a way that is, I think the other responsibility here is to have conversations with people in times and spaces when they can receive it. And so even when you're having a conversation around what fidelity is and looks like or what integrity means, doing that in a non-triggered state, doing that where it's to your point, a place of positivity and what we're trying to uphold as opposed to what we're trying to prevent, and doing the work maybe beforehand and saying, okay, I want to prevent this, but what is that rooted in? What am I actually trying to preserve or maintain through this act of prevention?
Yes. I think once you hit once you hit to the bottom and you find, oh, I'm trying to prevent this, there will be like, that's like a shadow side, right? There will be a flip side of that is bright and sunny and warm and cozy. And setting that as a goal, setting that as a value is gonna make the relationship like a brighter, sunnier place than if the whole relationship is based on like trying to prevent. Like that's just, everything is in the shadow side. Like everything is in darkness. You're trying to like prevent these darknesses. But if you instead look at those things, like they are your truth. They are our truth. And we are like just the way the human mind works, right? We are more motivated by, the carrot and the stick. We are more motivated by the stick, right? Yeah. We ultimately want to prevent pain. The brain is designed to prevent pain. Yeah. So it is, it makes sense that we are driven by things that we want to prevent. And that makes a dark life.
Right. Because as you're saying this, I can think of people in my life who I know who are in prevention state at all times, trying to essentially like kick the can down the road and continue to kick it and kick it and kick it. And like, if I create more boundaries, if I say, well, we need to have another conversation about it, if I like, then hopefully it'll go away for them. This desire for them to open their relationship or to do whatever will eventually go away. But you're then always living in this like state of tension, this state of like waiting for the bomb to drop and like holding your breath. And I've been in that place. So there's no judgment at all. I know the pain of sitting in the space of like holding your breath and waiting. And I don't, and the only answer, at least from me in that, was just to let go of some of that control, to remember I had been in relationships in the past that I was desperate for it to go well. And now looking back, I am so glad that we're not in that relationship anymore. So like remembering that like life and the universe and things turn out the way as they should, and lean into that. But it is really hard and uncomfortable when you're in that space.
Absolutely. It's super hard. And it's like you're biochemically you're enforced in that way as well. So absolutely, it takes practice. And again, this meditation is all those muscles that we don't use. This is why meditation is a thing that you need to do on the side, to help these muscles. I'll give you an example. One of the common fears that drive people, we all have it to a degree. For some people, it's much more acute, is fear of abandonment, right? So you can look at your behavior in relationship, monogamous, non-monogamous, polyfidelitous, whatever your relationship, your work life, any kind of relationship. Look at your behaviors that are aligned with preventing this idea of abandonment, right? And then you can look at that and look at your behavior so you get a good understanding of, know thyself. Yeah. And then see what the bright side of that is, which is it's a need for connection, it's a need for community, right? So you can now, if you now look at your behavior and instead of aligning it to for fear of abandonment, to prevent abandonment, you can now align it to creating community, creating connection, right? You're going to get to the same thing, but the behavior is going to be so much more wholesome and it's going to be so much more in service of you and the people around you.
Right. And two things to note, think there. One is, I think sometimes, at least for myself, when I hear abandonment, it makes me think like left. I'm going to come home one day and my wife's stuff is gone. And the reality of it, it's more like emotional abandonment, like feeling something and feeling no longer connected to the person who's lying next to you. Yeah. And you feel like you're in it on your own. Like that's the more common, I think, representation of feeling abandoned. Like you're left to this thing on your own. And I think that we often also, in our desire to protect ourselves, self-sabotage. I'm thinking of all the times when I've been in the midst of conflict with one of my, with my wife or my partner, and I'm like, leave me alone. I want to be left. And then they come to check on me and they're like, can I come close? And I'm like, no, I do not. Now, of course I do. Like the only thing I desperately want in that moment is to be held and loved and told that everything's going to be okay. But there's some voice inside of me that's like, I must protect myself from their love because then I may lose it at some point. And so I push them away. And then there's where the manipulation comes in, because then I'm like, well, how many times will you withstand my pushes away and continue to come towards me?
Testing.
And I'm testing how much you care about me, because if after 4 times you get exhausted and you stop, then you really didn't love me and you weren't trying enough. Like it's terrible, this like mind game that we play with ourselves. But I think that there's a reality in that of when are we self-sabotaging, and when are we doing things that are going to actually stop us from connecting in this hope that then we will build a fortress around us that we won't need that, and that moment will never come where we don't need that.
Yeah, that's again, that's know thyself, right? You need to the fact that you know that about yourself, right, is the first start. And there are other ways, so that's one way of doing it, right? So you're saying as one version of how you want connection, but you push it away to make sure that it's proven to you.
Leave me alone.
Yeah. But don't really, but maybe sit next to me, but don't look at me.
Exactly. Put your hand on me, but don't rub it, and just inch your way into loving me.
Yeah. So that's one way, and the other way is the other extreme of that is you want to see them at all times. Don't leave my sight. Don't leave my, I want text every day, every hour. Don't leave my sight. I want to, do nothing but gaze into each other's eyes and don't talk to anybody else, right? That's the other extreme of that. Of you want connection and you're going about it by suffocating the other person and shutting everything down, right? So those are all strategies to meet this need, and there are adaptive strategies and there are maladaptive strategies, right? And if you keep doing the same thing and it's not working, you might want to look at your strategy, right? Your need is clear, it's a need for connection. Often, if we have a fear of abandonment, it has the dark side of a need for connection, a need for community. And I want to also, often talk about need for connection. I really want to bring in this idea of need for community, right? Sometimes when we think about connection, we sometimes get stuck on this idea of connection with one person, right? When we have a fear of abandonment, it's not just connection, but it's also community. We are pack animals. Humans are pack animals. We used to live in tribes. We've only been living in the siloed way that we do in the last few hundred years. It's nothing in the grand scheme of humanity. It's a heartbeat that we've been living the way we've been living. We were supposed to live in tribes, in packs, in communities. So when we are riddled with this fear of abandonment and all we want to do is prevent it, right now where we are in humanity, our sort of mind when we're doing the work is to go to connection. It's also community. It's more than one person. It's family. It's friends. It's broader network. It's your neighbors. It's moms that you have play dates with, it's so you really need to cultivate that as well.
I can't tell you the amount of messages that we get about the podcast, or that I get in Instagram, I'm sure that you do too, that when we share out stories that people feel like some of the things that they've never spoken out loud are now they're hearing or reading, and that feels normalized now for them. Oh, okay, I'm not the only one in the struggle. And that sense of community, that was what drew me to Curious Fox originally, was realizing, oh, I'm not the only one. This very lonely feeling that I have, I am not the only one. And so even if it is finding community as a point of healing on your journey towards feeling connected and full and not desperate for, trying to prevent things, because now you have there's a community of people who are on that journey too.
For sure. Absolutely. And I do, it's a value that you can assign to your relationship. We talked about what are the values that you want to assign. A community, to have community as a part of to create community, to use your relationship to create community is also a legitimate, very acceptable way about going about your relationship. If you really want to look at the very sort of edge of polyamory, where essentially what people are creating are micro communities through connection of love, care, and sex, yes or no, right? Ultimately, for I would look at those relationships and say, oh, one of their values is community. That support network. So I'm not.
I love that idea.
This is not for me to this is not me telling everybody go and be polyamorous. Everybody, this is not what I'm saying.
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work. But all I'm saying is, look at the relationships. Look at your value. Look at the values that you want to assign to your relationships. Think about fidelity beyond just sexual fidelity. And really think about what is it that you want to be faithful to. Not just the person, but if you think, again, going back, it's faithful to a person, to a cause, or a belief. So it is a trifecta, and you kind of have to have that trifecta in your relationship too.
I love that. And I think that, you talked about this before, about framing things in the affirmative. So when people think, well, if not fidelity, then what? Like, then so many other things.
Yes, right?
I'm like, then like deep conversation, then agreement around values, then like excitement and adventure and journeying together. Like when you don't just have the default of, well, we won't sleep with someone else. Well, if we're not going to do that, then like, what else is there? I'm like, this whole world of like, of co-establishing and co-creating and collaborating on this. What will we be and how will we show up to the world and what's this adventure going to be like it's actually really exciting when you throw away the default and you decide that we're going to figure it out together.
For sure. I would add to that is if fidelity and then what as well, right? Because I do want it to I don't want to also fidelity is a legit sexual fidelity.
Yes.
First of all, I think fidelity in its original sense of the word, this idea of faithfulness to a person, a cause, or a belief demonstrated by continuing loyalty and support is a noble value.
Yes.
In its original form, it applies to relationships. It's perfect. If we then assign that, if we then go further and say, by the way, this relationship also has sexual fidelity as a part of the values, great. And then what? What else? You know,
or emotional. In some constructs, there are within their guidelines, people can have sexual relationships with somebody else, but not necessarily have an emotional connection. So whatever that looks like amongst the dynamic and agreement within the people.
So just and what? You know, and what else? And what else? And what am I trying to create? What am I trying? What is it that I love that I want to preserve? What is it that I dream of that I want to create? Those things are all available within the relationship. If we can really get into a place of creation and preserving the what feels good, what serves, and creating what we dream of, then really anything is possible. It's when we're held back, when we feel unsafe, when the fear kicks in. It's all around prevention. I want to prevent my partner leaving me. I want to prevent being alone. I want to prevent, losing my identity, right? Like all those things are all from places of prevention.
Yeah. I think that's my biggest takeaway from this conversation is to root things in what we are trying to create as opposed to what we are trying to prevent.
Right.
Yeah. And to talk about values and to talk about acting within integrity around those values.
Yeah. And I would say revisit and really understand what we mean when we say fidelity. And that
right, not just to a person, but a cause, an idea, belief.
And make your relationship that. Like make your relationship a cause, a belief, like something that you want to be faithful to. And work around that, you know, and it's a common goal, right? Then you're not then stuck in a dyad, triad, whatever your configuration, but you then have a higher purpose of being together.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Ooh, I'm for that. I'm about the movement. I'm about that. That sounds right to me. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for bringing in the topic. And this is great. I'm glad we talked about it. You came in this morning. You're like, I know what we're gonna talk about.
I know. I was like, this often will happen. I'm like, all right, Coach Effy Blue, I got something for you. And if you actually out there in the world are interested in asking us questions, we have a Curious Fox podcast hotline that we have set up just for you. So you can call 201-870-0063. If you have a question that you would like us to explore on the show, you give us a call. We will play your question as a part of the podcast. And so you can give us whatever information you want or not want if you don't want it on air. But call us at 201-870-0063. We'll put it in the show notes as well. But we have set up this phone line because we each get questions all the time and we answer as many as we can, but we want to make sure that other folks are the beneficiaries of these questions and answers because they're so universal. The things that we're being asked, we're like, oh, we need to talk about this. Everybody needs to know this.
Yes. I assure you, if you have a question, somebody else is asking that question.
Yes.
You're not the only one. I assure you.
Yes.
So call us, leave us a message. We'll play it. And I would then actually... especially if you're doing that, but just in general, like us, follow us on We Are Curious Foxes on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon. You will see from the comments that you're not alone. And so I really encourage you to, if you listen to us, please follow us, We are Curious Foxes on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon. Also, please like, review, and share the podcast. It really makes a difference, especially on Apple Podcast. It allows us contact to you, like we actually hear what you want, how you feel about the podcast, any kind of feedback, good, bad, ugly, we'll hear it. And at the same time, it really puts us on the map. Our mission is to change the noise. That is our hashtag, change the noise. There is a one homogeneous, one tone, one size fits all noise out there that gives us a prescription on love, sex, and relationships. We want to change that noise. We want to be one note away from that noise. And there are other podcasts out there as well. So it is our mission, and it really, really makes a difference. If you like us, review us, it puts us on the map.
It does. And if you follow us on any of those platforms, Instagram and Facebook in particular, and you share any of our posts, that also is really helpful because it allows more people to have access to the message and to have access to the work. If you have a question but are feeling shy and do not want it to be recorded, you can email it to us and we can ask someone on our team to read it on your behalf. If you email us at listening@wearecuriousfoxes.com, you can just let us know what you think about the show. Well, let us know if there are topics in the future that you'd like us to explore. And if you just have any messages, any questions, we love hearing from people.
We do. And last but not least, it does take a lot of effort. It takes a team of people to put these podcasts together, to put our programming together, and we do need your support. We do have a Patreon. We're putting a lot of content in there. We recently restructured it to make sure that we can really add value. We put a lot of videos there and a lot of information there. We do need your support. If you go to patreon.com/wearecuriousfoxes, you'll get to our little Patreon page. Please support us. Anything helps. Buy us a cup of coffee is what we say.
Yeah.
It really does make a difference.
$5 a week.
Yeah.
That's all it takes.
Yeah. It really makes a huge difference. So please support us.
And you get goodies. If you're in the New York area or planning on visiting New York, you can get free tickets to some of our in-person events.
Yes, absolutely.
We have some fun parties that are coming up. Embrace the warmth on behalf of upcoming spring. We're excited about that. We have panel discussions that we do, and we have other events, including presents and educator-led events. So if you're interested in coming to any of those, if you can't make it to those, you should check out our Facebook group where we live stream our educator-led events. And then when we do our next panel discussion, you'll be able to find it here on our podcast.
Yeah. So we're all over the place. We love you, and we would really like your support.
Yes.
And until next time, stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Curious Fox Podcast is not and will never be the final word on any topic. We solely aim to encourage curiosity and provide a space for exploration through connection and story. We encourage you to listen with an open and curious mind, and we'll look forward to your feedback. Stay curious, friends.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.